Welcome back to another episode of the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. Yes, we didn't forget the 5 this time. And yeah, as you can see, we're back with, or maybe here in a second, we're just back in parts because, well, it's again troublesome to get everyone on the table. And well, it's more a bit of luck that I'm here today as well, because I'm not sure how well it is hurt, but I'm still sick. And if there might be moments where I'm more or less dying, but we'll make it through this episode, I promise. And yeah, with this episode comes the second season, 21st episode comes the Inquisitor. And yeah, Alex, maybe a little summary from the episode?
Well, what does happen in this episode? It's a bit of a challenge for me because I'm always surprised when this episode comes up. Every time after the Nan-Centauri conflict is concluded, I think we go a little bit into a lull where not much big important things happen, but no, something very important happens. For the first time in years, I think, Kosh actually does things, and he invites a friend over on Babylon 5 to have a nice little party in the basement, and it escalates quite severely. So the Inquisitor comes, like the episode title says, and interrogates, for the most part, Delenn, but then also Sheridan a little bit. All the while, Jakar is trying to his best to, well, support the resistance in any way possible, and we basically see him jump through hoops this entire episode and actually have a few wins along the way, which is great because it hasn't been a great time for the Nan in the past weeks, so we finally see some positive developments there. I think these are the two broad strokes of this episode, and with this, as usual, what are your first impressions? I bet I can guess one of them, but we will see.
Okay, I have to concentrate because I'm not sure if I do not mix up this episode with the next episode because of schedule reasons. I watched 2 episodes and therefore not sure what I was thinking about this one.
Oh, no impression then. Is this your first impression?
No. The flu just wiped my memory, I think, or at least a little bit. It is interesting to see in a sense, like, how far is Kosh or overall the Vorlons going to take things to make sure everything they prepared in a proper way for what will come. On the other hand, it's like, yeah, what the fuck? If you're not sure in the beginning, why are you doing this now? I'm not really happy with this. And I think it's tough to see to what length Delenn is going. And I mean, the questions asked from the Inquisitor are quite philosophical in its nature. I mean, yeah, it's perspective against perspective. There's practically no right or wrong there. Also, something where I was sitting here like, oh, make it go away. And yeah, I really, really like seeing a few moments like the Garibaldi and Jakar talk. I celebrated a little bit. Lanier is, of course, at least for me, a bit of the hero of this episode.
I mean, he does. Without him, the episode couldn't be resolved, right? So he's a crucial part.
And yeah, well, the historical connection that is done in this episode, it's interesting. It's an interesting take, but and I'm still not quite sure how to feel about it and how clearly it was resolved in the end. Maybe let's leave it at that.
Okay, interesting. You didn't mention the part that I was expecting, but okay, this is... No, I was sure your main point would be that you were once again disappointed in the mystery of the episode, of the revelation that, of his identity in the end. But, I mean, if you say it wasn't resolved so clearly, we will definitely talk about that a little bit.
No, the problem is that it was resolved, how it was resolved.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I do like that you say parts of this are tough to watch out, the lengths to which the Warlords are willing to go. You definitely have like a more comprehensive understanding of this episode than I did when I first watched it. Maybe that was because I was a little bit smaller and definitely a lot dumber than I am today. But I went through this first episode the first time, and this is one of the few times I distinctly remember not really getting what the heck the Inquisitor problem was, like the whole way through. Like for me, I think all of the questioning was much too vague, and it all kind of felt kind of loosey-goosey, and just this guy like having his own fun time being kind of a sadist, and then going away and everybody kind of nods and concludes, oh yeah, this, we understand something more now than we did. And for me, this didn't really click until much later. There are a few elements that I now really appreciate, and regardless of like all the contents, I have to say that I absolutely adore the portrayal of Sebastian by Wayne Alexander. I think this guy getting the direction, you are an 18th, 19th century British gentleman straight out of London on this like sci-fi space station. Here's your cane, run with it. I think it takes a special kind of skill and talent to pull this off and not just come off as incredibly awkward because you're just kind of robbing the costume department and being sent on this like crazy theater stage with no like context. And to make this work and kind of feel like it fits in this universe, I felt is kind of impressive.
Yeah, the character is quite special, let's say. And yeah, maybe if do you want to start there, or do we want to start with something lighter, like the whole Jakar plot in here?
Let's. I love that. The man's planet has just been bombed, and you're like, oh man, let's look at something lighthearted and easier. Let's look at how's Jakar doing now that has happened. But no, definitely, let's start with that. And I mean, maybe let's start in the beginning. Where do we find Jakar after he gave his big speech in the last episode? Well, he's kind of raving on the streets about the end of the world, right?
Yes.
Was this something you were expecting from him so quickly?
Expecting, not necessarily, but I do see it fit for his character, because even though, I mean, the whole part of asking for sanctuary in the last episode, even though it was hard for him to do, he did it. And yeah, there's this telling people, they will come for you and everything like this. It is fitting because he, on one hand, it is of course he knows that this is what is going to happen. On the other hand, it's like, I want to get people on my side, and I will not stop anywhere to make this happen. And even though other Narn are coming over like, you can't, how can you do this? This is disgraceful and stuff like that. He's like, I don't care. I have to do something, and my options are limited, and I do what I can do, and this is one of the things.
I think that this idea that saving face doesn't really matter to him anymore just speaks to the fact that he really understands like how big this thing that he's talking about is. That he's like, no, it doesn't really matter like how I come off now, because he's not the ambassador anymore. So saving face for the station isn't really the big deal anymore. Now it's just all about like having a voice and kind of getting that out there. That being said, I do think in him like standing there and preaching, I feel like we just get the confirmation now that Natoth probably went back to the homeworld or something like that. Because if she was there, I'm pretty sure she would just like grab him by the collar and drag him back into his quarters to beat some sense into him. I feel like she was, to some degree, always this was a channel to his energy in some way. And now that she's not there anymore, he's kind of spinning out of control a little bit and needs to find this like elsewhere. Because, I mean, I say this in a little bit like thinking about the rest of the episode, because I feel like his entire arc in this episode is about connecting to his own community again, like becoming the leader that they actually respect. And here in the beginning, maybe this link between him and this community has severed a little bit, because without his title, what really is he anymore, and how does he relate to them?
Certainly, yes. What I found rather interesting that at the end of the scene, we have Veer standing at an higher position and who watched this whole speech of Jakar. And I was getting a bit giddy to see, okay, maybe what's happening? Is there something more? Because yeah, I mean, we know Veer's position, that he wasn't happy with what Lando did, and that if he could have changed it, I'm pretty sure he would. And I mean, we get confirmation later. I'm jumping a bit ahead. When he is in an elevator with Jakar, and he is telling him, "I am sorry." And I think this is. I'm not sure how good of a judge I'm there, but I think this is really good acting. What's happening there in the elevator?
I think from both ends, like Veer's delivery of this, like Stephen First really playing into this character, which started as such a comedic kind of sidekick in season 1, and like really bringing him down to the serious level is incredible. But then, of course, Andreas Katsulas playing Jakar with this whole like slitting his hand and counting the droplets of blood. I think he brings across in a nutshell all this emotion that he's kind of ladling on Veer there, which, I mean, I think it crushes Veer to some degree, like this absolute inability to build a bridge there at this point, because there's nothing to say. There's nothing that either of them can do to fix any about this, which is just such a shame.
Yeah, but also just to stand there and say, "I am sorry."
Yeah.
He is trying. He started over and over. At least I remember doing that. He did that. And yeah, I think this just shows how heavy the whole situation is weighing him down, even before this talk with Jakar,
I mean,
which really heavily contrasts with what Lando's doing at this point.
absolutely. I mean, one of the first things we were talking about in the Long Twilight Struggle is, man, I wish we would have seen how the aides react to this. And even when you go back to the first scene, the fact that he is there watching Jakar talking about this, he is one of the few people actually listening to Jakar, which is the complete opposite to Londo, who had to be dragged by his heels to watch the planet burn, who didn't really want to face the consequences of these actions and see it firsthand. And here we see Veer wasn't around for the conclusion of this war. He wasn't in a position to change any of that, but now that it's done, he is forcing himself to face the consequences of that and, listen to these people. And I think it's fair to say, probably, yeah, he wants to do something about this. He doesn't run away from the elevator. He wants to say that he's sorry. He wants to find like an avenue for this. Which would be interesting, like if we locked up Londo and Jakar in the same elevator at this point, like how that interaction would go, because I don't see either of them remaining as composed.
Yeah, that would have been interesting to see here, but maybe that's exactly the point, that we don't see it at this point. So Veer can develop a little more, and Jakar. So maybe in the future we have Veer in a position where he maybe even goes so far and helps in some way, even if it's just I'm looking in a different direction. I should.
I mean, we know that he's not above kind of abusing his position of power. He lied about being the ambassador of the Centauri to help a loving couple in the first season. So there's definitely, he's like, once again, he gets introduced as this kind of bumbling fool side character, but he's quite clever about these things. So I think it's definitely, yeah, once again, this is much more in his wheelhouse than compared to the big politics during the ongoing war. Maybe this is his chance to do something about this. But of course, in this episode, it's Jakar who wants to do some things, and what he wants to do is continue the fight, buy some weapons, and we have this like beautiful little interaction with one of the slimiest arms salesmen that you can possibly find on this station. And yeah, there is this entire detail of this is not just about buying weapons. This is in some part buying back the weapons, right?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not clearly remembering that scene, but yeah, that Jakar still tries to apply a little bit of ethics, morality to this weapon salesman. It's quite interesting to see, but on the other hand, it also shows how desperate him and the remaining Narn are.
Yes, of course. I mean, just once again, cementing this fact that he doesn't have resources at this point anymore. He does have money to pay for these weapons because of all the blood that is on this money, like people basically draining all their funds to make this happen, because he is not part of the mighty Nan regime anymore. That doesn't exist anymore. So he just kind of has to, deal with what little he has. And I mean, you say you don't remember it so much. There's kind of this back and forth where he's like, how can these weapons be this expensive now? We sold them to you when you were attacked by the Minbari, which is the second time that this parallel is drawn between the Nan getting attacked by the Centauri and humanity getting attacked by the Minbari. And yeah, it's just of course, applying this kind of logic and ethics to the situation doesn't work out very well because, well, tensions are high, the prices are steep. It's just, the market has spoken, and for the arms dealer, this is good news. For Jakar, much less so.
Yes. And of course, it goes even further by Garibaldi appearing and saying, "Hey, Jakar, you can't smuggle your weapons here." But I really love this interaction because, the important point there was that Garibaldi was like laying out or leaving enough rope for Jakar to hang himself, and he didn't because he chose honesty. And I really love to see this because it's this honesty prevails kind of idea. I really appreciate that they put this, even though it's just a little thing and one thing of a time, but that what happened there. And of course, the dynamic between Garibaldi and Jakar was also really nice to watch.
They work really, really well together, and I think in this Jakar-centric storyline, this is a really nice character moment for Garibaldi too, because I think we talked about him in general a lot more in season 1, where there were more episodes where he was really actively doing things, and one of the things that always stands out to me, especially in this watch-through, is that Garibaldi's whole perspective is being the down-to-the-ground man who cares about people much more so than political affiliations. And with Garibaldi, we saw this in his friendships that he has. He was great friends with Londo at some point. Well, not great friends, but something
Not
like the closest thing to a friend that Londo had on the station, because Garibaldi doesn't really care about the Centauri Republic or the politics of what they're doing right now. He cares about Londo and what this guy is doing. And I think more so than any big political implications, he's personally now very disappointed in Londo for what he did. And this friendship is kind of died out because of that. And as a flip of the coin, he doesn't really care about whether the Nan regime is there or not. He cares about what Jakar is doing, and he gives Jakar this chance to prove himself and is willing to help because of that, which is, it's just a very nice perspective to see this kind of help compared to Sheridan, who seems to be aiding Jakar now much more on the kind of principle level. Like he is involved with all of this fighting for the good guys, the army of light, against this cosmic threat that is going on, and so we need to toe the line for that. Garibaldi really isn't involved in any of that. It's just more about, I like this man, and he's been good, he's been honorable to me, so this works out.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Garibaldi is completely out of this, because his connection to these travelers, I forgot their name.
The Rangers.
the Rangers.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
that is fair.
He is connected. He knows what is going on. Even though I'm sure that this personal level might be the stronger part in his action, but I don't think that he's completely excluding the whole scenario that's happening on a big scale there.
That is fair to say. I mean, it's not this complete black and white thing. The same that I think Sheridan definitely has some personal, sympathy for Jakar that he's doing this for, even though I would argue for him probably the higher idealistic thing is maybe the bigger priority right now. But it's just nice to see the different levels of interactions that are happening here.
Exactly. And yeah, even though Jakar gets this chance, this help, he still gets questioned from his own people. Can we trust you as a leader? And yeah, here's your challenge, Jakar. Prove yourself. We want to talk with our families. Even though I'm not sure in the end, is it just one family that gets some talk out or more? I didn't really understood this.
I always assumed that essentially, like on the little data crystals that they are smuggling back and forth, there is like a big batch of these messages, and we just get to see a glimpse of it to kind of confirm, okay, they managed to do this.
Yeah, because the whole structure doesn't get that clear to me, and I hope, or I assumed that it would be like there are several messages on for several families on this, because the overall idea that just one family got through would have been a bit disappointing.
Full as you would want it.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not enough motivation for a whole group. Or at least I would assume that maybe the Nards are just on a different kind of level there, but overall, for me, it was just quite, lovely that this guy's family is somewhat alive, but what about mine?
But I mean, to some degree, I'm completely with you that I would also assume and hope that it's multiple messages that are being sent there. But even if it's the one, I think I would still argue, well, it's the motivation isn't about is my family fine or not, because even if you get this confirmation, well, they're fine now. By the time I've read this message, they might not be fine anymore. Like they are on Narn that's irradiated and terrible. They are not safe under this occupation. The point is Jakar did something that is supposedly impossible. He did something that we didn't trust he had the resources for, and somehow he pulled it off. And if he did it once, if it's just a one message, he could probably do it again and again and again and again and again. It's just this very symbolic thing. But nevertheless, I think it's a much stronger symbol if he manages to get multiple messages through. And I think I've always read it at that way in any case.
Maybe a good luck question.
Definitely, like how this comes across. But I think it's either way a great testament that I think this is one of the first times we really see the Rangers do something in concrete terms. Like we've seen a lot of, they're gathering information and preparing and such, but like, what does that actually mean? And here we get this idea, well, it means getting information back and forth, which is great because it gives us this confirmation, well, the Rangers aren't an army that Sheridan now has, where he can, march to Centauri Prime and fix things like that. It's not that easy. But getting information back and forward and just having these ways of working around the regime of the Centauri, for example, this is still very important. Like this, dealing with an occupation like this is more complicated than fighting the good fight and then somehow winning that. It's about like slowly building up this resistance movement, which is what Jakar ultimately manages to do a little bit here.
I would be curious though how they did it in this moment, because I remember that when Sheridan was like, we want to have some watchmen down there on Narn, they were declined. Therefore, who are the people that still somehow get there on the planet?
It depends, who is part of these Rangers. We know that the Rangers under the Len have involved a lot of Minbari. So, if you take that role, maybe this has enough weight that you get there. Or if that's not the case, I would argue a human probably has a lot easier time disguising himself as a Centauri than a Narn possibly would.
Yeah.
And it can also just be this thing, you definitely don't want official observers coming to Narn and reporting on that, but the Centauri might care a lot less about, some random human going there, because what is he gonna do? Like, tell everyone that conditions are terrible? Well, that's fake news. We don't care about that. Like, what is he gonna do? He's officially not carrying any weight, so maybe it's a little bit easier. I think ultimately where it for me comes down is this planet got bombarded into the Stone Age. There's no infrastructure for the Narn, but also not for the Centauri. So there's probably ways to get in and out of there.
Though the idea of like a human pretending to be a Centauri and that then getting there, that would be interesting to see.
Very funny to see. Like,
Yeah.
even just like seeing a human cosplaying Narn Centauri behavior and be like, yes, of course, I am one of the great noble houses here to occupy. I hate those pesky Narns. It would be great.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, the end of the line, Jakar manages through the Rangers, through the help of Sheridan, and therefore stays in his leader position, and that's the end of his storyline in this episode.
Which is interesting because it feels very hopeful, right? Like, oh my god, yes, weapons cache is now coming through. He has managed to get the message out. But at the end of the day, all of this just means he can stay where he is. He hasn't actually made a lot of progress. It's just not falling further, which, given the whole circumstances, it's a great success. But at the same time, he has a long way to go to fix any of this. So
that's in the end, it's just I'm still standing.
Yeah. But I mean, he has, like, just on his character level, asking for asylum was the hardest thing he ever had to do. Asking the Rangers to help him maintain his station was just a tiny bit easier. And asking, like, Garibaldi to help in these aid packages and look the other way was a little bit easier. So I think he's making progress in this direction, that working together is actually a good thing, a lesson that I think Babylon 5 in general is a lot about. So he's on the right path there. Now, or do you have anything on that?
No. I just wanted to try a transition there because he is on the right path. Dylan, to from Kosh's point of view, obviously not. Otherwise, he wouldn't call an Inquisitor on her.
An Inquisitor who just happens to be a murderous serial killer by chance. Yeah. Out of all the humans he had in the fridge, this is the one that he put out. So I feel like there are maybe two big avenues that we can take on this side of the plot. We could either talk first in general about Kosh and his choice of Inquisitor and kind of what that implies in broad strokes, and then there's also the actual interrogation and how that goes. And I feel like maybe if we differentiate that a little bit, we get through this a little bit more cleanly. But do you have a preference which part to start with?
I'd say we start with Sebastian.
Sebastian, who, once again, I love this character, and I can't even explain to you really why, because he is just so out of left field. He is so different from any other, like, weird people we've seen on the stage. I guess the closest one, I would say, is somebody like Gajik looking for the Grail all the way back in season 1, like this wanderer seeker who also felt very much like he was fallen out of his time and was, like, on this mythic quest. And Sebastian feels similarly, like he does not belong on a space station at all, but once again he manages to carry himself with such a sense of superiority, and it's just like he appears and it's like, of course it's him. Who else would it be? What else would I expect a Volon Inquisitor to be like? Like, I don't even know, like, at this point what I expected when they first talked about sending an Inquisitor in. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe a short comment on that. I wasn't expecting a human when Kosh said I called for an Inquisitor. And I was a bit disappointed when I saw Sebastian's face the first time.
Okay.
Um, I don't know. I'm not sure what I expected, but this was a bit, yeah, like what? What? This is what you sent? This is the scary Inquisitor that gives obviously Dylan nightmares.
I mean, that's interesting. Yeah, that especially to calling like this is what you sent. Excuse me, he's a person. Maybe he is. Like who knows? But I mean, moving past the initial "what the fuck," which is definitely a valid response to have. What are we thinking about this choice to make? Because for me, like on every level, I feel like this is the most maybe we can learn about Kosh since a long while, because like he is the guy orchestrating all of this. So I have to imagine everything that is happening here happens for a reason, and that reason is that Kosh looked at it and decided, yeah, this is how I want to go about this. So the choice to send a human to interrogate an Membari, kind of interesting. It's kind of a role reversal. Up to this point, the Membari were always superior compared to humans, and now, you know, he's whipping her around with pain collars and that kind of stuff. And then also like calling him an Inquisitor, which is, you know, not a name that is connotated with we are the good guys and we just want to make sure that you're good. Like, no, that immediately sets you up for some kind of torture. And then, yeah, just pulling somebody out of like multiple centuries removed. Like this, is there a point to this, or is this just Kosh pulling a power move and being like, listen, look here, what we can do? Isn't that neat? We have people from all kinds of ages. Like, it's just so many odd choices in there, I feel like.
Okay, it seems a bit like we're back to Kosh.
Yeah. I mean, it's Kosh back to form, that is true.
Yeah, I mean, when the title, like I called an Inquisitor tell, I was like, okay, why call someone? What is the problem? Because so far, I wouldn't have seen some sort of problem with Dylan, because she, in the end, always stood firmly at her, point of view, her position of, I will fight, I will protect. There, at least for me, there was no crumbling or hesitation. And yeah, why Inquisitor?
It just gives you this question, like you mentioned first, why now? Like, what has happened recently that would prompt Kosh to say this is the moment to do this? And then if you bring in an Inquisitor, that immediately calls to mind, okay, so you call an Inquisitor when you have a suspicion of someone. You suspect that somebody is heretical, is not following the rules anymore, is not the right person at the right time in some way. So what brings this on? Gosh, what the fuck is happening? What is your problem?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, yeah, do you have any suspicions what might be the reasons for this? Like,
The only thing I could imagine is that because of all the change that happened to Dylan, that there might be a chance for her personality to change, her values and stuff like that, a new point of view, and to make sure that she's still on track and didn't get her up in her high. I try again. And that she didn't get up in her head like, oh my gosh, I'm so an important person. I will be the hero of the next century, whatever. Which is, or at least that's the parts where Sebastian is calling her out on. Like,
I mean, yeah.
you're the chosen one and stuff like that. Though I have to say, I don't see Dylan in this kind of position of her being a chosen one, or at least not in this arrogant way he is accusing her of.
It's interesting because if this is sort of the persecution, right? Like accusing her of feeling like she's the holy chosen one. The last time we heard this was, I think, if I remember correctly, from the Grey Council, right? Like the Grey Council being like, you entered this transformation, like forcing the prophecy forwards, and we didn't want that. And you just kind of did that on your own. And then you reject being our leader because you think of yourself as some kind of, special person like that. But one, that was quite a long time ago. That was the beginning of season 2, like her getting all of these repercussions from her own people. And then why would Kosh be on the same page as the Grey Council, right? Like, it doesn't really seem like he's so buddy-buddy with the Minbari all the time. But on the other hand, yeah, I mean, let's look at what Delenn has done recently. Like, one of the recent things was she and Linear alone going into the plague-infested part of the markup that all died out. I mean, we know she did this out of compassion, and it was nice and all, but I mean, let's be honest, it does sound like somebody would do, like something somebody would do with a little bit of a messiah complex going on there. Like, I'm gonna go in there no matter what and like do the last rites, this sort of thing. So maybe Kosh looked at that and was kind of iffy on how that looked. And I mean, the other big thing is, at the end of last episode, they proclaimed sort of an alliance of light. She handed over authority over the Rangers to Sheridan and such, so she kind of, maybe this is it, her getting more into this role and like actually using this authority. And now Sheridan is out there giving missions to Rangers and like having them like interfere with the conflicts. This is the first thing that comes to mind for me, because Kosh so far, anytime something has happened with wars and such, he was like very laid back and I don't deal with these kinds of things. And now that Delenn and Sheridan and such are kind of starting to, do things, maybe this is it. Maybe this is him feeling like, okay, they're getting more active. I really want to make sure. But even then, like framing this as this accusation rather than a reassurance is weird, is kind of a weird choice.
Maybe first about the plague. Yeah, that was, let's say that was a tough thing to do. Overall, I would see Dylan more of an empathic person, and that she was, just emotionally so deep in the situation that, okay, I have to do this. I can't do anything else. Maybe that's just my personal projection on her. The only what I think you could accuse her in this situation of, that she is deliberately risking her own life for something that is not part of the prophecy, what the Wallons are trying to do.
That would be a really interesting framing, that they have kind of this idea, you are the chosen one and there is this future for you, but don't do anything else. Like, do it correctly.
Okay, that wasn't the best way to say that. Yeah, no, she is.
I think that's a completely valid way of saying that. Like, I mean, I could imagine something like this happening if you're some kind of like, big entity that wants to do things. I mean, look, the Wallons blew up a ship that had the cure for aging because they decided that is actually not how you are supposed to attain this. So I wouldn't put it past them necessarily.
Well, and the second part, I would consider Delenn giving away her power, her authority above the Rangers, the Warriors of Light, whatever. I would I would say that it's exactly the opposite. I mean, if you want, or if you think you're someone special and power interested or stuff like that, you don't give away your authority about people. But she is doing so. Like, here, I prepared this and now I'm stepping back.
I mean, that's the same as her like stepping back from being called as a leader of the Grey Council, right? If you
Yes.
imagine she's like this power-hungry maniac trying to become a cult leader or something like that, that would be the first thing that she does, like take all the power that she can get. But for me,
And maybe before you keep going on, the Grey Council, I mean, it meant something for her to be part of this. And she still continued to walk the path that was, kind of what the Warlords wanted, and giving up something she cared for, something that had high value, which is, a bit of a sacrifice. And I would say, that goes in the direction, okay, she's, even though it is something hurting her, she keeps going. Like, I would want to be behind such a person in this kind of situation, because I know they won't stop. Even if it's something uncomfortable or something, that hurts them.
I think there's definitely, this is maybe an interesting question again also to how our lurkers understand the entire mission of the Inquisitor, because I feel like I have some contradicting feelings on this. The Warlords definitely don't want to Delenn to become somebody like Reefer, somebody who's power hungry and wants to do this for himself and, goes crazy with this idea of being the chosen one. Definitely. Like, this is what Sebastian talks about a lot, in part because we get this heavy implication that he believed himself to be this chosen one at some point. But I wonder if this is all that the Warlords are concerned about. I mean, sure, they don't want her to be Reefer, but maybe they are also concerned that she is too empathetic, too willing to sacrifice herself, that she kind of goes blindly into this cause to such a degree that this is also a detriment. Which, the only reason I can believe this a little bit is because I look at Kosh and how he is always neutral, doesn't even attend the meetings, always kind of steps back from this. The Warlords seem very much that they have this policy of non-interference, that they are like, they would go the Star Trek route of being like, this planet is sad and suffering, but you can't just give them all kinds of technology because in the long run, this would be bad. And maybe this is kind of what they're also asking of Delenn, to be like, yes, you are fighting for the good guys and you want to help everybody, but you need to be willing to also make cruel decisions, sacrifice people, send people into dangerous situations. And if you are so empathetic that you can't do that, if you're so, concerned with that, that would be a problem. With the way Kosh behaves and with the way Delenn behaves, I think this makes somewhat sense, but then I don't think this fits a lot with what the Inquisitor is saying this meeting was about.
That's my problem, because in the end, why does Sebastian stop torturing Delenn and then later Sheridan? Because they are willing to sacrifice themselves out of the spotlight. No one will see, on a big scale, no one will benefit from this sacrifice. Therefore, that doesn't really fit for me. But on the other hand, I don't really see a proper explanation why this is happening. I mean, why do you torture someone? Why do you go to such a length, put someone in this position to prove what?
Yeah. Especially, if you have people like Kosh, who is a crazy powerful telepath, right? Like, it's not like he couldn't enter her mind and just, flip through it and see if her convictions are real or not. I mean, the one thing I might add to that is, I don't know how reliable Sebastian is as a narrator for all of this, because there's definitely this undertone that he believed himself to be a chosen one. This was his original sin, and then he spent being an Inquisitor all the time, trying desperately to find somebody who's willing to sacrifice themselves to just be free of this curse of his existence from the looks of it. So maybe this is just him reminiscing and being like, yeah, this is for me, you pass. And Kosh looks at this and says, well, incidentally, you also happens to prove the point that I was more interested in. But this is where it gets very convoluted. I don't know what the heck is happening in Kosh's mind. We have an entire episode about him interrogating people, and still I don't know what his priorities are.
Yeah, the problem is, if you can't believe Sebastian as a narrator for this cause, then why is he there?
Yeah, then everything else kind of falls apart, right? Then what is reality at this point anymore? Like, if he's not reliable, it all kind of falls apart, right? Like, if his conclusion of the trial isn't reliable, then his questions aren't reliable anymore, and then what the heck are we doing here anymore? I wonder, like, the last time Kosh did something utterly inexplicable, it was him, like, dealing with the weird man with his exposed brain and having Talia scan this. And now, after the fact, after divided loyalties, we can kind of know, okay, maybe what he was doing was kind of taking a brain scan of her, so that maybe he can help her with that or something like that. He doesn't done anything with that yet, so we don't know where this is going. But after the fact, it kind of made sense. But with this Inquisition, I really struggle to imagine, like, after the fact, what would be revealed that I look at it and say, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense that Delenn had to be put into a dungeon, strapped up, and like electroshocked really hard a few times to get a point across. I don't know. Maybe, like the questions, maybe all of this talk of the deeper meaning of this trial is kind of just for show, and all that he's really trying to do is like really push her buttons and give her just a sense of how difficult and painful this trial is going to be. Which, I mean, fair, but for all we know, Delenn lived through the human Minbari War, so it's not like she lacks life experience with difficult times. So I don't know. It's a questionable choice, I would say.
Yeah, which makes the whole episode problematic, because what is it that we gain apart from, okay, Jakar managed a few things, but the whole Delenn plot is, yeah, the only nice thing in a way is that Sheridan comes to the rescue, or at least he tries to, and that both of them are willing to protect each other.
I mean, we knew this already. Like,
yes,
we know how selfless Delenn is. We know that Sheridan is a good guy. I mean, for me, the highlight is Lanier figuring out something is wrong and knowing, where do I go to Sheridan? It's like, once again, it's to me like being in a horror film and somebody decides to call the police. Like, holy shit, that is actually a sensible thing to do. That is crazy. Thank you so much for that. But I don't know if I would say that this is necessarily problematic for the episode as a whole, because I think even if my conclusion is, man, this entire trial of Delenn was kind of pointless, I still have learned that Kosh did a pointless trial, and I think there are still like enough nuggets for me there that give me a lot more. I mean, one of the things for me is the Inquisitor, to me, feels a little bit like the counterpart of Mr. Morden. Like, Mr. Morden is this guy that comes in from the Rim, seemingly out of nowhere, a guy that should definitely be dead, and then he always talks about having these crazy associates behind the scenes. And here we have this guy, a guy who should definitely be dead, keeps asking people incessant questions that are nonsensical at first, and then essentially, has these associates, these crazy powerful Warlords, where we don't really understand what their relations are. It's kind of a parallel thing there, that this seems just to be a thing that very old and powerful people do in this universe. Just grab people and have them as their emissaries. And yeah, I think it's just, there are a lot of questions I have now about the Warlords that up to this point I didn't have so much. Like, why Jack the Ripper? Why did they pick him up in the first place? That to me is actually kind of interesting, because at the time, he's just a guy who murdered 5 women. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of these people in history. So once they picked them up, did they already know that he would become this like incredible cultural phenomenon? Because if they did, that's crazy. Then either they had knowledge from the future and are like involved in time travel, or they are just this good at manufacturing myths. Like, did they ensure that Jack the Ripper is so crazy powerful as a mythical figure, or did they just foresee this happening? It's kind of interesting.
Mhm. And also on the other hand, the Wallons have been to Earth before. No one noticed.
Time, yeah.
And for some reason, they picked a human for their homeworld. I mean, we already made fun of the Conroe
yes, the big corn circles.
the corn circle aliens, but yeah, essentially the Wallons did in some way the same.
Yeah.
And yeah, why do you collect people from? I mean, it's not like they were like, hey dude, we like you, you're interesting, do you want to come with us? No, it's like, okay, you're doing weird stuff, you're doing horrible stuff, even for this world. Let's pack him up and take him with us.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I would pick if I. It feels a bit like someone is going to choose a pet. Like, who would you choose? The one who bites you, or probably maims you, or the nice one?
I mean, I can definitely think of some people who would go to the pet shop and, pick the scrungly one, the one that nobody else wants, because, you have like a special place in your heart. And even if he bites you at first sight, if you, are nice to this like weird scrungly cat, then eventually it becomes one of the sweetest things ever. Like, I've seen videos like this, so I can imagine that. But I hardly imagine the Wallons like that, and I hardly would equate a grumpy cat to a serial killer. So it is such a weird thing, especially because Sebastian talks about himself believing himself as kind of this messianic figure, this like he was like all about the degeneracy of the world, which holy shit, if he looked at like 18th century Earth and was like, man, our morals have gone to shit, man, would he be angry if he knew where this was going? So, oh boy. But then the Wallons also taking this guy and, essentially sitting him down and being like, yeah, you're God, not real. You're a shithead, and let us torture you for the next 200 years to tell you, like, exactly what your mission is going to be. It's just such a weird angle to take. But yeah, I think it has a lot of interesting implications. Like, maybe they chose this guy because they were like, we don't want to pick a human up who is good, because we don't want to deprive humanity of this guy. We want to, pick somebody who's basically dispensable. Yeah. But even so, like, did they know that? I mean, did they have this much faith in humanity that we would survive, or were they like, oh, it would be funny if they survived and then we have this guy around? Like, do they have a giant stockpile somewhere of a bunch of dead people who they can just unfreeze and have fun with, depending on which species survives?
And depending who they want to send a message to. Oh yeah, the Centauri are behaving weird. Okay, let me check. Which kind of Centauris do we have in the freezer?
I like this image that Kosh is like, okay, Delenn is picking up a lot of irresponsibility right now. I would like to have kind of a trial with her and give her reassurance that she's the right person for the job. And then another Wallon clerk is like, yeah, I'm sorry, we don't have any, like, Minbari in storage. We do have this weird, crazed serial killer from Earth, though. Oh yeah, she does like an Earthman right now. She's buddy with Sheridan. This is close enough. This will be a fun experience for her. Like, Kosh just being too dense to understand what he's doing to this poor woman. Maybe it's as simple as that.
Yeah, maybe his inner troll is bigger than we ever thought possible.
We know that Kosh has like a weird obsession with Earth's history. There was this scene early on where he had like this floating TV screen looking at like random images from Earth history. So maybe it's just his own little hobby. Maybe it's his personal collection, and the Wallon Empire as a whole isn't even sanctioning this in any way. It's just like, man, can you put your toys away, please? Stop playing with the humans. It's not nice.
Oh gosh, this is opening so many mad ideas. No, let's close this very difficult.
If we go to the more serious thing, I am kind of fascinated by this idea, and this would be like, it would be crazy, but I would be fascinated by this idea if the Vorlons deliberately chose this random serial killer and then spent 200 years fostering him as this like massive literary figure. That like there's always Vorlons on Earth kind of, pushing a publisher to bring out another book examining Jack the Ripper, just because they want to ensure if in 100 years we send this guy to interrogate a human, this human will know what's up, will know the myth of Jack the Ripper and like immediately recognize him. That kind of like, this seems like this long con plan that I would imagine the Vorlons can come up with, which, I mean, whether or not that plan is true, the basic sticking point for me is we just pronounced the Alliance of Light, and Delenn is trying her best to be a good guy, and now we have these Vorlons abducting serial killers and using them, which is just, none of this is a good guy thing to do. It is a very suspicious thing to do, and something that makes me question their morals a lot. So yeah, it's Kosh must have a lot of confidence in his own PR to pull this off and somehow still get away as being the good guy.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's not like Sheridan and Dylan walk over to Kosh and yeah, okay, buddy, we have to talk about this. No, it's like, okay, you did this. I'm sure you had some things in mind with this. We accept this. Honestly, they were tortured.
Yeah.
This is...
I think maybe this is all just a test to get them to stand up to Kosh, and they actually failed because he's like, really, guys, you let me do this to you and not question my orders? That's highly problematic. You should know that at some point you should start questioning what people are putting in front of you. Maybe it's that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I would have walked up to Kosh. Okay, buddy, we have to talk about this.
Okay. You mentioned the reveal in the end, because it's funny to me that the fact that he calls himself Sebastian and doesn't reveal that he's Jack the Ripper right away, like, I don't think this is just his personal thing. It doesn't really have to do anything with the interrogation necessarily, because if it was a human getting interrogated from the beginning, I would put a lot more weight in this, but Delenn has no real reason to know who this guy is, so it's just kind of a fun Easter egg for the humans that are around to put in there. But what do you think about this in general? Like, how this show chooses to handle this, like, quote-unquote historical figure?
Yeah, the problem for me is that I do not understand why this is Jack the Ripper. We of course, we already said it. Why did they pick him up? But it's not like we are given, at least not at this point, are given some sort of explanation. So
Okay.
it's maybe it's a bit of a writer position there, but why do you choose someone like Jack the Ripper?
I think, just as you point towards this spontaneously, I think I have a reading on this. But did you have a theory on your own?
Actually, not really at this point, because maybe if there is a reason to this character, like in the story, and it's explanation. I try again.
Okay.
I don't even know where I started off.
Maybe this is...
Yeah. Maybe there is a reason why this character was chosen. Maybe there's an explanation later on to a greater context from the whole Vorlon perspective. But at this point, it feels rather random. Like you already said, he killed so and so many people, women. Why choose him? I mean, maybe it's the time is important for some reason, or England is important, or Great Britain is important in some reason. But in this episode, and at the ending of this episode, there's, at least for me, I don't see an explanation why this character was chosen. And it doesn't. Yeah, it feels rather exchangeable. Maybe a part of his little own story in this. of course, you have this of how, that the Warlords took someone who was a bad person, a psychological person that now was in imprisonment for 200 years and had to endure. Yeah, the question is, what exactly did he have to endure? A part of being alive. And yeah, that doesn't satisfy me at this point, because there's no explanation of why, and this random a background. At least it feels like this. Yeah.
I think I mostly have sort of a meta reading on this right now, but this might bleed back into some in-universe reasons. But I think we've already talked in our own little podcast here about the fact that sometimes there is a little bit of a contrast between what works in fiction and reality. Like having Sheridan be a guy who likes conspiracy theories, like having Sheridan be a military commander who is obsessed with conspiracy theories, is great for this character in the show. If it happens in real life, I would be highly concerned by that. I don't want a military commander be a guy who is like, oh, but maybe the Earth is really flat, or, maybe somebody did poison the whales when the pandemic started. Like, this is not usually what you want, but in this story, it works kind of well. Or my favorite example of this is, everybody likes a superhero story, but do you really want some random guy with powers enacting vigilante's justice? Usually not. Usually there's a reason why we want to keep our law enforcement embedded in a big bureaucratic structure of laws, because people going off on their own isn't actually a good idea in reality. And I feel like, or if you want to interject there.
I understand where you're going, that we have this, like there is a conspiracy that no one talks about. It happened, a conspiracy that Sheridan doesn't know of. Like, he's confronted with a reality there, but it doesn't feel like this, because I think the whole conspiracy thematic they opened up with him, at least to me, feels a bit too thin.
I mean, but what I'm trying to get at is this idea that we get a lot of archetypes in this show that in reality are actually very problematic. And my meta read on this would be that essentially Jack the Ripper is put in here as this cautionary tale, that, JMS is looking at me and saying, I know that people who think of themselves as the hero of the story, as the chosen one, in reality are mostly lunatics, are not the people you want in power. So if I'm telling you the story about Sheridan or Delenn, the chosen one of my universe, I am aware of this fact and I will incorporate this into my story. And maybe even I could see that this is more of the point that Kosh in Universe wants to get across. It's not actually about learning anything about Delenn or Sheridan. It's showing them, here is this guy from Earth who thought he was the hero, and he was chosen by the Warlords. Let me show you what it looks like if you are chosen by the Warlords. Oh yeah, you do get to live forever. It will be torture for you, because you will have a purpose and you will be frozen otherwise, and you will be just a pawn in somebody else's bigger game. That is not what you want. You don't want to be a chosen one. I don't know how well this gels with everything, but at least on this meta perspective, from everything that I know about JMS and how he writes his stories, I could easily imagine that this is the case, that he wants to kind of turn around and say, this mythos of Jack the Ripper, which is all really cool in fiction, but as a real person, he's just a serial killer, and it's just bad.
Yes, and maybe a little other take on that would be to show, look, in this direction you could develop.
Yes.
Like, because he himself is saying, I am, or I was a chosen one. I thought I was a chosen one, and went on this killing spree. And to show Delenn and Sheridan, okay, this is where you can end if you're not careful enough. And of course, in this department, then that not every that the result doesn't
Justify the means.
justify the means. I'm sorry, my flu is just taking the best of me.
You warned us about this, so this is perfectly fine.
Yeah, that I would see in there maybe as a combination to what you said.
And I think this then perfectly tracks again with what we know about the Vorlons, that they said, yeah, getting to immortality is great, but not through Deathwalker and all her crimes and her like setting you up to fight for 1,000 years over the cure that she's created. That is, those ends do not justify the means that you're acquiring through. So that I think makes a lot of sense.
Which we finally have an answer to why Kosh is doing this.
I mean, if it is the satisfying answer, once again, is a good question to ask to our lurkers, but I think it's as good as a conclusion as we can hope to get to, especially given the fact that you're struggling with the flu and we are only at half capacity on my end here. So I think that's a pretty decent place to end this discussion, unless you have any other small tidbits, details that jumped out at you.
If there was, I'm afraid I can't remember.
I mean, if you want, we can just keep sitting here and do immediately the discussion on the next episode. I'm sure this would go great at this point.
Well, at least it's fresher.
I mean, the last thing that I do like, what does this episode add to the tapestry of Babylon 5 in general? People from history can show up. It is something that the Vorlons can do. The Vorlons have been around for a long, long time, and there is this idea that legends returning is actually much more viable. Like, having seen this episode, looking back at the guy who was looking for the Holy Grail, maybe he was onto something. Like, if there's a guy now that is like, oh, I am searching for the cane of Jack the Ripper. Up to this point, we would have said, why the heck are you doing this in Minbari space? There's no reason to do so. Now I know, honestly, maybe it might be true. Maybe he was there. So it has opened up this universe a little bit more to mysticism. And I feel like this is happening a lot recently. Like, we have this whole depressing real-life war and occupation going on, but we have the Rangers now, just like in Lord of the Rings, in their cloaks and everything. We have the giant machine now that is, astral projecting the Minbari everywhere that Dral, everywhere that he wants to go. Now we have like historical people that can show up and stuff like that. So we have this whole development of a much more mystical universe on top of the depressing real life stuff that is going on. And that's, I think, maybe a prospect of where this show in general is moving towards, which we can be excited about.
Yes, and overall, this like, I think especially the historical person people appearing, I think this is it feels, at least for me, a bit like showing, okay, look, we there's so much technology and knowledge we acquired over the time, but there are still so many things we do not know about, even in our past, even when we were there, even though we were researching, we were looking in our history back, and then there's so much we still do not know about, which is interesting aspect, considering how well it feels a bit, especially in the science fiction context, there's a bit of knowledge arrogance sometimes. We know everything there is to know. In our backyard, therefore we don't have to look there. But yeah, if we look into reality, there's always something new we find, where researchers suddenly find, like, oh, there was a completely different human being existing back in a time there and there. And yeah, we have recently found some sort of little rodent that dates back to the time where the dinosaurs were living. Therefore, I like this idea of there's still so much we do not know about.
And on this topic of arrogance of knowledge, there's this idea that, just like you say, there's so much more to discover. And also this idea that just because we're in space now, we haven't really resolved anything more because of that. We talk about this constantly when we're talking about Earth Alliance history, but the fact that you can pick up Jack the Ripper from 1800 something and put him on the space station, and even though he has not seen any of this technology before or anything like that, he can comment on everything and he can bring up the same philosophical question. It kind of gives you this idea, the things like, what does it mean to be chosen? What does it mean to be an idealist? What does it mean to sacrifice yourself? Those aren't things that are going away. We don't develop a new technology and suddenly this question is resolved. This is something that keeps coming up and stays relevant, which I think for something like Babylon 5 is very ambitious, because it's a show that was created 30 years ago and still feels very relevant. So this idea that things just don't go away just because it happened a long time ago is kind of interesting.
Certainly is. With this, I think we're done with this episode. Where do people find us?
People find us on essentially any social media network that is out there, and anywhere you can find podcasts. But sticking around here is not just the best idea because here we look the cutest, because people can see us, as Layla likes to say, but also because here is where we are most active. We do have all these other social media networks, but maintaining all of that is a hassle and time is limited. And if we are struggling to get everyone on board just for the recordings, you can imagine it's not easy to keeping up with everything else. We're doing our best, but if you want to make sure to catch us here, it's the best way to subscribe and like and be around here roughly every week around Sunday.
And for the few people who are just listening to this, we're talking about YouTube.
Oh, yes. Well, they should have put that together when we were talking about seeing them. Please,
yeah.
Smart people.
Yeah, but maybe they are like me and have the flu, and therefore their brain is walking through the worst parts of their mind. Therefore, we hope you still somehow enjoyed this episode, even we're not on our complete capabilities, and hope you see on the next episode. Until then.